Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good evening.
To właściwie dobry wieczór. Nazywam się
My
Dariusz
name is
Bugalski. Mam
Dariusz
zaszczyt i
Bugalski, and
przyjemność
it's my honor and
powitać
pleasure
Państwa na
to
uroczystości
welcome you
wrenia
at the awards
Międzynarodowej Nagrody
ceremony
Literackiej imienia
for
Zbigniewa Herberta
Herbert
2021.
International Literary Award
Witam.
2021.
No, brawo. Witam tych, którzy są tutaj z nami w Teatrze Polskim w Warszawie. Witam także tych, którzy są z nami
as
za
well as
pośrednictwem
everybody
transmisji
joining us
internetowej.
online.
Może jeszcze powitajmy. Witam wszystkich bardzo serdecznie, ale najserdeczniej i najszczególniej pozwolę sobie przywitać panią Katarzynę
special
Herbert.
welcome goes out to Madam Katarzyna Herbert.
To jest 9. edycja
This is
nagrody.
the 9th time we've
Otrzymują
been
ją
awarding
najwybitniejsi
this
poeci,
award, which has
myśliciele.
gone out to the greatest
W.S.
poets and
Merwin,
thinkers
Charles
like
Simic,
W.S.
Ryszard
Merwin,
Krynicki,
Charles
Lars
Simic,
Gustafsson,
Ryszard
Braden
Krynicki, Lars
Breckenbach,
Gustafsson,
Joachim Weil,
Braden
Agi
Breitenbach,
Michel i
Walla
Bruce
McDollan,
Greenby. Do
and
tej pory.
Norse
A dzisiaj?
Greenby,
No ale to
and
za
that's
chwilę.
so far.
Najpierw zapraszam na scenę panią
But for
Marię
now, I want
Dzieduszycką,
to
prezes
invite
zarządu
Maria
Fundacji imienia Zbigniewa
Dzieduszycka,
Herberta.
the
Mario, zapraszam.
president of
Przywitajmy.
the board of the Zbigniew Herbert Foundation.
Dobry wieczór wszystkim Państwu.
Good
Witam
evening
bardzo serdecznie.
and welcome.
Cieszymy się,
We're
że już
very
po raz
happy that
9.
this
możemy
is the
spotkać się na
9th
uroczystości
time
wręczenia
we've
Międzynarodowej
been
Nagrody
awarding
Literackiej
the
imienia
Zbigniew
Zbigniewa
Herbert
Herberta.
International Literary Award,
Przyznając corocznie nagrodę
awarding
imienia
the
Herberta,
award annually.
pragniemy nie tylko
We want
upamiętnić jej
not only
patrona,
to
ale
commemorate
również
its
i przede
patron,
wszystkim
but also and
przypominać
above
o
all
wartościach
to
wpisanych w
recall
jego
the
poezję,
values
o
of his
nieprzemijającej
poetry,
aktualności tej
the
poezji.
lasting topicality
Dzisiaj,
of
kiedy
this
żyjemy
poetry
w
today,
kakofonii
when we're living
informacji
in
i
a
fake
cacophony
newsów,
of information and
kiedy
fake
często
news,
trudno jest
when it's
rozróżnić
difficult to
prawdę
tell
od półprawdy
truth
czy
from
prawdy
half-truths
alternatywnej,
or alternative truth,
potrzebujemy kołatki
we need
Herberta,
Herbert's
która nam
knocker
odpowiada
to tell us
tak,
yes,
tak, nie,
yes,
nie.
no, no.
Drodzy Państwo,
Now, ladies and gentlemen,
dzisiejsza uroczystość ze
today's
względu na pandemię będzie miała
event
trochę nietypowy
will,
charakter.
owing to the
Z
pandemic,
powodu
be a little
zagrożenia dla jego
different.
stanu zdrowia,
Due
tegoroczny
to
laureat
concerns
nie mógł
about his
przylecieć do
health,
Warszawy,
this
ale
year's
będzie z
winner
nami,
was
obecny
unable to
na
join us
żywo,
in Warsaw,
za
but he will be
pośrednictwem
joining
połączenia
us live
internetowego i za
online,
chwilę
and in a
usłyszymy
moment
go
we'll
i
be
zobaczymy
seeing
na
and
ekranie.
hearing him on the
To, że
screen.
możemy się dzisiaj spotkać,
This
zawdzięczamy wielu osobom
Event
i
was made
instytucjom.
possible by
Wszystkim
very
jesteśmy
many
bardzo
individuals and
wdzięczni.
institutions, and
W
we're very
szczególny
grateful to all
sposób
of
pragnę
them.
podziękować
I would
partnerowi
particularly
strategicznemu
like to
Nagrody
thank
imienia
the
Zbigniewa
strategic
Herberta,
partner of the
Fundacji
Herbert
PZU.
Award,
Bez
the
Państwa
PZU
naprawdę by tej
Foundation.
nagrody nie było.
Without the
Dziękujemy
foundation,
bardzo.
this award would not have been possible. Thank you ever so much.
W tym roku chciałabym
And this
szczególnie
year, I
powitać
would like to
przedstawicielkę
welcome the
ambasady Stanów Zjednoczonych,
representative of the
panią
U.S. Embassy in
Dominikę
Warsaw,
Świętońską,
Dominika
Head of Art and
Świętońska,
Culture
who's
Exchange
the
Unit.
head of the
Witamy
Art
panią
and Culture
serdecznie.
Exchange Unit.
Serdecznie też witam
I
przedstawicieli
also
naszych
want to
partnerów.
greet
W tym roku po
our
raz pierwszy
partners.
Stowarzyszenie
This
Autorów
year,
ZAIPS.
the
Witamy
Copyright
przedstawicieli
Association,
Instytutu
ZAIPS,
Adama Mickiewicza i
the Adam
Biblioteki
Mickiewicz
Narodowej.
Institute, and
Również
the
chciałam
National
powitać panią
Library.
Agatę
I
Pieniążek,
also want to
przedstawicielkę
welcome Agata
wydawnictwa Znak,
Pieniążek, representing
które z
the
okazji
Znak
dzisiejszej
Publishing
uroczystości
House,
przygotowało
which
obszerne
has
wydanie
published
wierszy
an
laureata.
extensive selection
Zapewne część z
of
Państwa
the
już widziała tą piękną
winners'
książkę.
poems.
W kancelarii
I
Traple,
want to
Konarski,
thank
Podrecki
Traple,
dziękujemy
Konarski,
za
Podrecki,
jakże ważną dla
the
nas
law
opiekę
firm,
prawną,
for their
a
legal
Polskiemu
support,
Radiu za
and
patronat
Polish Radio
medialny.
for
Wszystkim
extending
Państwu,
media
którzy jesteście
patronage
tutaj z
over
nami
us.
w teatrze
And
i
to
którzy
all of us,
uczestniczycie w tej uroczystości za
and I
pośrednictwem
want to wish all of
transmisji
you who are
internetowej.
here with us
Bardzo
physically
dziękuję za
and those
obecność
joining
i
us
życzę
online.
pięknego
Thanks
poetyckiego
for being with
wieczoru.
us, and I hope we'll have a wonderfully poetic evening.
Maria Dzieduszycka, bardzo
That was
dziękuję.
Maria Dzieduszycka. Thank you very much.
Głupio wyszło, ja się nie przedstawiłem z tego wszystkiego. Nazywam się Dariusz
I'm
Bugarski,
afraid I
wystąpiłem
didn't
anonimowo. Proszę mi
introduce
wybaczyć.
myself. I forgot to do that. My name is
Teraz
Dariusz
chciałbym
Bugarski.
przypomnieć skład
And
jury
now let me remind
nagrody.
you
To
of
są
the
wybitni
names
poeci,
of
badacze
the
literatury,
jury,
wydawcy,
outstanding poets, literary
Juri
scholars,
Andruchowicz z Ukrainy,
publishers, Yuri
Edward Hirsch
Andruchowicz
ze Stanów
from Ukraine,
Zjednoczonych,
Edward
Michael
Hirsch from the
Krüger
US,
z
Mikhail
Niemiec,
Kruger from
Mercedes
Germany,
Monmani z
Mercedes
Hiszpanii
Monmani from
i
Spain,
Tomasz
and
Różycki,
Tomasz
który jest
Różycki,
przewodniczącym
who is
jury.
the chair
Tomku,
of the
zapraszam
jury.
cię.
And now
Tomasz
I want
Różycki.
to invite Tomasz Różycki to join me on stage.
Dobry wieczór Państwu.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
W imieniu
On
jury
behalf of
mam
the jury,
ogromną
it is my
przyjemność
great pleasure
ogłosić,
to announce
że
that
laureatem
this year's
Międzynarodowej Nagrody
winner
Literackiej imienia
of the
Zbigniewa
Zbigniew
Herberta
Herbert
za rok
International Literary
2021
Award
jest
is
Józef Komuniak.
Józef Komuniaka.
Józef Komuniaka
Józef Komuniaka is surely one of the most original and the most expressive poets of our times. His voice, which brings together the experience of a black man born in small town Louisiana and raised in the tradition of jazz and blues, a Vietnam War veteran who writes about the most painful experience of life in the U.S., is universal and deeply, profoundly human. It speaks a language that belongs to the tradition of many cultures, a poetry of great sensuality, sensual energy that grows out of the body and touches the matters of the world, participating in a spiritual community where the particular joins the universal in a characteristic syncopated jazz rhythm, and Billie Holiday meets Ezekiel and Hesiod. It is the poetry of a communion of spirits conjured with the beating of a drum, a poetry of dance and love, a song celebrating life and existence. He was born in Louisiana as James William Brown, a carpenter's son, at times when segregation was still a fact and the Ku Klux Klan was a criminal reality, which is likely why freedom and justice are values that he never forgot when writing his poems. These tables of values, as Edward Hirsch put it, are not the only parallel with Herbert's poetry, but perhaps the most important one, a sense of justice and speaking about those who craved freedom and dignity and were oppressed, betrayed, and deprived of their voice, silenced. This led him to return to the name of his forefathers, descendants of enslaved people brought over from Africa. His writing is influenced by music that grows from African American culture, jazz and blues. Gospel brought him to the Bible, one of the few books available at the time to a black child, with its poetry and its message. During the Vietnam War, where he was a press correspondent, he understood that he would be a poet, and his poems about Vietnam made Yusuf K an important author who not only takes part in the history of his country, but also shares in the fate of common GIs, of common soldiers, Americans and Vietnamese, fascinated and compassionate. And just like Herbert's imagination was shaped by multicultural Lvov and the historical forge of totalitarian tragedy tempered it into a brass instrument, for Komuniaka, his birth, his origins, and the experience of Vietnam turned this amateur into a jazz classic. His works move readers regardless of where they come from, because music Like music, they are time embodied, a time we can hear. Komuniaka began by writing about jazz for the papers, and later became a virtuoso of form. Like the great jazzman he writes about, he creates an open structure where the motif is intertwined with surrealist flashes of imagination. This form, as he himself says, leaves openings in the construction for the reader to enter and immerse themselves in a river of time, to take part in the creation of a poetic world. Just like Herbert, so Komuniaka also studied the French surrealists and materialists, where the visionary and the concrete, spirits and objects meet in a single metaphor. Just like for Herbert, the poetic imagination is a sounding box that captures voices from the beyond and makes communication with the dead possible. Komuniaka, titling one of his books of poetry, Talking Dirty to the Gods, talks dirty to Hermes, Charles Mingus, or the gods of the jungle, Jehovah himself, or Aphrodite, the most beautiful goddess, or with the spirit of an antelope whose hide was used to make a drum. Communion with spirits ensures continuity of community and culture over time and boundaries. The power of this instrument, the power of the body, is something that Zbigniew Herbert knew very well when he described the aftermath of the duel of Apollo and Marsyas. The god, having flayed his rival, walks off cleaning his instrument, racked by shivers of disgust. Meanwhile, Marsyas screams, his body screams, his blood screams, and there's nothing more real than this voice that turns larks to stone and makes trees turn gray. For Komuniaka, poetry is an instrument that sings, beats the drums, and screams. It invokes good spirits and casts out bad evil spirits. Spirits are sensitive to the truth, and when a song is about true love, true suffering, and true pain, only then will it be heard, just as in Ode to the Oud, where he writes, gourd-shaped muse, swollen with wind in the mulberry, tell me everything you're made of, little desert boat of raw, oblong box of Bedouin doves, pecking pomegranate seeds out of the air. You're the poet's persona, his double, in the high priest's third chamber. Each string a litany of stars over the Sahara. A little boat of sorrow, little ship of sorrow. Bend your voice till the names of heroes and courtesans, birds and animals, prayers and love songs swarm from your belly. Congratulations, sir.
Bardzo dziękuję, Tomku. Tomasz Różycki.
Thank you very much, Tomasz. That was Tomasz Różycki, and now
i wcześniej zabranie głosu. Proszę
to
panią
present the award and to say a few words. Let me invite Grażyna Melanowicz, a member of the board of the PZU Foundation, strategic partner of the 2021 Zbigniew Herbert International Literary Award, and Maja Komorowska, member of the board of the Zbigniew Herbert Foundation.
Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen, the PZU Foundation is once again supporting the Zbigniew Herbert International Literary Award. Herbert was a poet who enjoyed great moral and artistic authority. The
imienia Zbigniewa
Zbigniew Herbert
jest
International
promocja
Literary
jego
Award
twórczości, ale również
was set up to
promocją
promote
kultury
his
polskiej.
work
Tego
as well as
rocznego
to
laureata
promote
bardzo
Polish
serdecznie
culture. We
gratuluję.
want to congratulate this year's winner.
Myślę dzisiaj o
Today,
wspaniałych wierszach
I'm
Herberta
thinking about
i takie
Herbert's
zdanie
wonderful
utkwiło
poems,
mi,
and there's
który
a
napisał w jednym
sentence
z wierszy:
that's stuck
bliznę
with
po
me
odejściu
in one of his
dobra
poems.
pamięć leczy.
The scar of
23
parting
lata
is
pamiętamy.
healed by
I
good
nasza
memory. We've been
pamięć jest
remembering Herbert for the past 23
Kiedy
years,
spytano
and our
Norwida,
memory is
jakie
alive.
słowo
When Polish 19th
ma w
century
sobie
poet
największy
Cyprian
dramatyzm,
Kamil Norwid was
powiedział
asked which
za
word
późno.
is most dramatic,
I
most
to jest takie
powerful,
wspaniałe,
he
że
said,
nie
it is the
jest
word
za późno
too
na
late,
pielęgnowanie
but
pamięci.
it is not too late to
To
remember
jest wspaniałe, że
and
spotykamy
to
się dzisiaj i że jest ta
hallow
nagroda
the memory.
i wszystkie te lata
We're very
poprzednie
happy
i
to
że
be
to
meeting
wpisuje się
today.
właśnie w
We're
naszą
happy that
pamięć.
this award exists,
To
that
pielęgnowanie
we
pamięci.
have cherished
Myślę bardzo
and kept
dzisiaj
up
też
the
o
memory.
Adamie Zagajewskim.
I'm also
Myślę, że
thinking about
wszyscy
Adam Zagajewski.
pamiętamy, jak właśnie
I'm
tu na
sure
tej scenie
all
był
of
z
us
nami.
remember
Spróbuj
him
opiewać okaleczony
here
świat.
on this very
Adamie,
stage. Sing a
próbujemy
wounded world.
opiewać.
Adam, we are
okaleczony
trying
świat.
to sing a wounded
A Herbert
world.
to potrafił.
And Herbert certainly
Dziękujemy
could
mu
do that,
za to.
and we appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
I teraz, proszę Panie,
And now,
wręczenie nagrody
if I could
symbolicznej,
ask you
wirtualnej
two
niemniej
ladies
jednak.
to present the award,
Bardzo
it'll be
proszę.
symbolic
Było
and
mowa
virtual.
o laureacie, tyle
We've,
wspaniałych słów, to ja może powiem jeszcze kilka miłych słów o
Said a
nagrodzie.
lot about
To
the
jest
winner. Let me
statuetka
just
autorstwa
say a few words
pracowni
about
Szaroszyk i
the
Rycerski,
award.
architekci.
It
Laureat
was
otrzyma
designed
tabliczek o
by
wartości
Szaroszyk and
50 000
Rycerski. The
A fundatorem
winner
nagrody jest
will
Fundacja
also
Prezydentu
receive a
Partii
check for
Międzynarodowej
$50,000.
Nagrody Literackiej imienia
The
Zbigniewa
award
Herberta
was
2020.
funded by the PZU Foundation, strategic partner of the 2021 Zbigniew Herbert International Literary Award.
Maja Komorowska i Grażyna
Maja
Melanowicz, bardzo
Komorowska
Pani
and
dziękuję.
Grażyna Melanowicz, thank you very much, ladies.
Tomasz Użycki. Co za dżentelmen.
What chivalry.
No dobrze, i teraz
And now,
bardzo proszę
I would
laureata,
like to
któremu
ask
jeszcze raz najserdeczniej gratuluję i podziwiam
Józef
o zabranie
Koniaka,
głosu. Bardzo proszę.
to say a few words, sir.
Thanks a lot. Lord
Bardzo dziękuję.
of misrule
Mistrz karnawału,
and
mistrz
quasi
zamętu
persona.
i quasi persona.
I grew up in
Wychowałem
rural
się
Louisiana.
na wsi w Luizjanie.
The Native Americans
Rdzenni mieszkańcy
called
nazywali
this land
tę
Bogalusa,
ziemię Bogalusa,
which means
co oznacza
dark waters.
ciemne wody.
But when newcomers arrived
Lecz przybysze ze wschodniego wybrzeża
from the East Coast, it became known as
nazwali je
the Green Empire.
Zielonym Królestwem.
They saw
Ci przybysze
old growth
traktowali
forests
prastarą
as
puszczę
timber
jako źródło
and
drewna do
lumber,
wycinki,
mere commodities.
jako źródło towarów.
So I grew up in a tree cutting
Dorastałem
town
zatem w ośrodku przemysłu
with
drzewnego.
a sawmill. The magazine lumber company,
Mieszkaliśmy
less than
niecałe
200
200
yards
metrów od
from our
tartaka
front door.
Magazine Lumber Company.
The chemical smell
Opary chemikaliów
from the
z
paper mill
papierni
and box factory.
oraz fabryki opakowań.
On the north side of towns
na północnej
owned
części
by
miasta
Gaylord,
firmy Gaylord
clouded of a
często
measured city, often with a
zasnuwały
deadly,
nasze
misty,
magiczne miasto
gray, sad weather.
niezdrową, ponurą, szarą
For my
aurą.
boorish instinct,
Jako chłopca
I always found myself headed
ciągnęło
for the
mnie
wondrous
jednak
woods,
do zaczarowanego lasu,
the swim hole we called
do
Bitch Hole,
rozlewiska Mitch Hole,
that had been blasted
które
deeper
było
by
pogłębione
dynamite.
przez dynamit.
All the sanctuary
Było
that
to
often
schronienie,
left me
które
wordless
często
and
budziło
adventurous.
niemy zachwyt.
It seemed from the
chęć
time I
przygody.
opened my eyes,
Wydawało
I was
się,
an
że
observer,
odkąd otworzyłem oczy,
taking in
byłem
everything around me.
obserwatorem,
My
chłonąłem świat
psyche was
wokół
awake
mnie.
with trees,
Umysł
insects,
przepełniały mi
big
drzewa,
vines,
pnącz.
berries. Grandmother, whom
Moja babcia
my
po
four
stronie
brothers,
mamy,
sister,
którą
and I
z
call
piątką
Mama
rodzeństwa
Mary,
nazywaliśmy Mama
loved
Mary,
to tell the story about me
opowiadała,
at
jak
Sweet Beulah Baptist
w
Church
dzień Bożego
Christmas Day
Narodzenia
when I was
wzięła
4,
mnie do Sweet
and
Beulah
how
Baptist Church.
the preacher
Miałem 4
grew
lata,
happy in the
a
middle of
kaznodzieja
his
się nakręcił podczas
holiday sermon,
świątecznego
saying,
kazania
"Brothers and
i
sisters,
powiedział:
can I get a witness?"
bracia i siostry, kto z
Members
was
of his
da świadectwo?
congregation raised
Wierni
their hands
podnosili dłonie
and shouted, "Yes,
krzyczeli:
Pastor."
tak,
And
pastorze.
then my hand shot
Wtedy
up
również i moja
as
dłoń
I
się podniosła.
attempted to say,
Usiłowałem
"Witness,
powiedzieć:
witness."
świadectwo,
Now,
świadectwo.
what seems like
Wydaje się,
a lifetime ago,
że to było całe
I
życie temu,
remember 10 years
ale
after
pamiętam,
that
jak
Christmas day,
10
I
lat
found
po
myself
tamtym
reading
Bożym
James Baldwin.
Narodzeniu
He
czytałem
had
Jamesa
become a
Baldwina,
teenage
który
preacher in
też
Harlem
był
before
nastolatnim
he wrote
kaznodzieją
poems
w
and
Harlemie,
short stories.
zanim zaczął
I
pisać
first
wiersze
read
i
his
opowiadania.
collection of essays,
Najpierw przeczytałem zbiór esejów
"Nobody Knows My Name,"
Nikt nie zna mojego
and his
imienia
first novel, "Go Tell It
oraz
on the Mountain."
pierwszą powieść
He
Głoś to na górze.
commented
Od
on his calling
z
as a
samego
black writer
początku pisał
from
o
the
swoim
beginning,
powołaniu,
but I
co to
don't
znaczy być
know
czarnym
how long it took
pisarzem.
for him
Nie
to
wiem
say,
jednak,
"I
ile
felt
czasu
condemned."
upłynęło, zanim
My
powiedział:
family never
czułem się
talked
skazany.
about race and racism. The photos on our living room, in our living room, were mainly faces of men who served as soldiers in World War II. We never talked about them. Some of the faces were among us daily. Others would show up on Christmas or 4th of July, and a few was missing forever. Back then, most of us country boys knew how to hunt and fish. I learned to embrace back-breaking manual work, but also drew up my plans for houses and greenhouses and planted roses and azaleas around the fence line of our 3-acre garden. My father was usually working as a carpenter somewhere in the white neighborhood. I always loved to read, to know the names, vernacular and scientific, of everything around me. We never talked about college. Few were surprised to see me in military uniform, and my service in Vietnam still seems to dominate the essence of my life Upon my discharge from the U.S. Army in 1973, I entered the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. And it was there I picked up a selection of Milos's poems at the stone lined bookstore. I read his poem, A Poor Christian Looks at the Ghetto, that left me totally enthralled. It entered my psyche. It would not let go. In fact, the poem's reason for being, its urgent, one-of-a-kind imagery, still resides in me, especially the last three stanzas. Slowly born, eternal, a garden mole makes his way with a small red lamp fastened to his forehead. He touches buried bodies, counts them, pushes on. He distinguishes human ashes by their luminous vapor. The ashes of each man by a different part of the spectrum. Bees build around a red trace. Ants build around the place left by my body. I'm afraid, so afraid of the garden mole. He has swollen eyelids like a patriarch who has sat much in the light of candles, reading the great book of the species. What will I tell him, I, a Jew of the New Testament, waiting 2,000 years for the second coming of Jesus? My broken body will deliver me to his sight, and he will count me among the helpers of death, the uncircumcised. The imagery is so magically straightforward. The reader or listener cannot say he or she does not know what this poem is about. Yes, the mole imagery may be daunting, but feeling what the allegorical terrain means emotionally and psychologically, there isn't a need for paraphrase. The mole is a helper in the underworld, but perhaps the speaker in the poem sees him also as a witness or an arch disciple of the patriarch. The mole is a go-between. Was this what poetry was supposed to do? Indeed, those magnetic lines helped me to engage in world poetry. And it was Milos who said, Herbert also fulfills the wishes of those Polish poets who searched during the war for a balance between an all-out protest against man's crime and faith in man. Here I realize that when it comes to sociology and psychology, to the politics of race and gender, and any number of topics and categories, how easy it is to sometimes nail one's heart and soul to the cross. And again, Milos sets the tempo for gauging and discussing Herbert. He says he attended a clandestinely operated high school during the war. Besides participating in the underground military training classes run by the resistance and earning his living at odd jobs, he saw action in a guerrilla unit. After the war, he obtained a diploma in law, studied philosophy and history of art. Herbert's Mr. Cogito is perceptive. After all, this quasi persona rises during the Cold War out of the psyche of a former World War II resistance fighter. In fact, Mr. Cogito is a speaker who is rather cagey. One could even say, at heart, Mr. Cogito is probably an ironclad pragmatist. At this juncture, perhaps one should not be surprised by the clandestine posture of this quasi persona that sprung out of Herbert's astute imagination. Even if one wants to argue with the philosophical premise or conceits in the couplets that open the poem Mr. Cogito and the Imagination, with Mr. Cogito had never trusted the tricks of the imagination. The piano at the top of the amps plays concert farce to his ear. He had no regard for labyrinths. The faints filled him with disgust. He lived in a shelterless house without mirrors or dialectics. One might have difficulty logically arguing with the simple, direct truth of a bird is a bird, slavery is slavery, a knife, death is death. In poetry, particularly, often less is more. Herbert knew how to say more than what seems overt, or even more than what is so expertly signified. It was easy for me to recognize Mr. Cogito for who he truly is. In African American folklore, syndication is social and political. We created a pantheon of animal characters, symbolic totems of wit and resolve, such as Broad Rabbit, the fox, the turtle, and the bear, each truly a performing persona whereby the woes and ills of human society can be addressed through totem stand-ins and go-betweens. Such characters usually instill a comical or satirical air to moments of reality, deadly serious. I feel nature has also become a place of reckoning with what we witness and contemplate, mind and body. and I found myself creating a voice that negotiates the time and personal history through the tone of a quasi persona prompt to speak in a poem entitled Venus's Flytraps. I am 5, wading out into deep sunny grass, unmindful of snakes in yellow jackets out to the yellow flowers quivering in sluggish heat. Don't mess with me, 'cause I have my Lone Ranger 6-shooter. I can hurt you with questions like silver bullets. The tall flowers in my dreams are big as the First State Bank, and they eat all the people except the ones I love. They have women's names with mouths like where babies come from. I'm 5. I'll dance for you if you close your eyes. No peeping through your fingers. I don't suppose to be this close to the tracks. One afternoon I saw what a train did to a cow. Sometimes I stand so close I can see the eyes of men hiding in boxcars. Sometimes they wave and holler for me to get back. I laugh when trains make the dogs howl. Their ears hurt. I also know bees can't live without flowers. I wonder why Daddy calls Mama honey. All the bees in the world live in little white houses, except the ones in these flowers, all sticky and sweet inside. I wonder what death tastes like. Sometimes I toss the butterflies back into the air. I wish I knew why. The music in my head makes me scared. I know things I don't suppose to know. I could start walking and never stop. These yellow flowers go on forever, almost to Detroit, almost to the sea. My mama says I'm a mistake, that I made her a bad girl. My playhouse is underneath our house, and I hear people telling each other secrets. The narrator of Venus's Flytraps seems like an earlier self talking about an intimate reality felt and known. At times inside myself, but also the speaker is an inquisitor. I haven't always known this. Now I've realized the first line of the poem subverts the personal pronoun I, which shapes how we receive the poem. The image of my 5-year-old self crossing the semi-limits railroad tracks, raising a strand of barbed wire, crawling underneath, entering the Bogalusa airport. For years, I could feel the sunlight, even if I was 10,000 miles on the other side of the world. But suddenly, I hear again the alarm of my mother's voice, and I've come to realize through the years, the first line wrote the poem for me. It was the only way I could have written Venus's Flytraps. It was not planned, it was improvisational. I have not been fully aware of the sharp turn in the last 5 lines of the poem, how we are in a place that is inside of another place, a difficult place, and even perhaps inside the troubled moment of the speaker's skin, a shared inner sanctum. I admire Herbert's concerted will to avoid or disengage the die, the the die. How is poetry, even when he's in the midst of totalitarian injustice, when he adopts Mr. Cogito as his interloper who speaks a verbal sleight of hand because of his bedrock knowledge. Mr. Cogito is more than mere satire. If anything, this persona is a mindful visionary. I wonder if the poet had a sly grin on his face when he wrote Mr. Cogito in his notebook. In fact, one may just close his or her eyes, sit there reflecting, and sometimes with just a smile or thought at work, Mr. Cogito is always a mid-sentence of serious thought and philosophical reasoning. Matter of fact, Mr. Cogito is somewhat of a pragmatist propelled by revolutionary thinking, but without a conjurer's imagination, this persona would not have even an artificial leg to stand on. The straightforwardness in Herbert's work rises out of his knowledge, his quicksilver, mechanical wit. No, the poet cannot be afraid of the mystery a poem might cast. Sometimes mystery may be the poem's lodestone. I first read Herbert's The Stone and Milosz's The History of Polish Literature. And here's the poem. The stone is a perfect creature, equal to itself, obedient to its limits, filled exactly with a stony meaning, with a scent that does not remind one of anything, does not frighten anything away, does not arouse desire, its odor and coldness are just and full of dignity. I feel a heavy remorse when I hold it in my hand and its noble body is permeated by false warmth. Stones cannot be tamed. To the end, they will look at us with a calm, very clear eye. Herbert's poetry begs for interaction. In fact, it demands at least a clear-eyed mental action and or reaction. And one cannot be passive in the company of this poet's mind. His poignant questions reverberate out from an elemental truth one cannot argue with. Of course, the receiver of the stone may ask, is the stone an opal, an uncut diamond, a hunk of jade, a sea-polished stone, an agate, or just any old stone kicked on a twilit gravel road? When does a stone, even if it is merely metaphorical, lead to a medieval stoning? Through Herbert's narration, the stones remain astute witnesses. Herbert is usually a playful venture that arrives at a serious turn, point, or moment. It begins in a well-chosen query, and the reader or listener feels how things are adding up in the real world. And then one arrives at a realistic, pragmatic state of being, a juncture that prompts reflection, where the mechanics of inquiry are active. Often, the small moments cohere and magnify greater thinking and feeling. That is, one can hardly exit a Herbert poem without contemplation. Each poem is carefully assembled with its turns inside the shape, and then it is given its heart muscle, the reason it exists. There's a deduction, and then an arrival. Over 15 years ago, I wrote a long poem titled The Autobiography of My Alter Ego, which is a monologue spoken by a white American Vietnam War veteran. And it is this rather complex dual reality that creates the psychology and language of this character. For the past 10 years or so, Autobiography of My Alter Ego has been performed by the actor Alan Bennett, who has been drawn to poetry and plays, beginning with Shakespeare and Beckett, as well as works by modern and contemporary avant-garde. In fact, not until Alan recited the poem did I trust the voice I captured. The 30 movements of the poem is spoken by a mature white man whose father was a cover artist. The father was paid a handsome sum to imitate Black American singers during the 50s and 60s. At this point, this Vietnam veteran, now a bartender, an owner of the Caramel Club, is speaking to a few consumers on a rainy night. I don't know what town or small city. The first and last sections of Autobiography of My Alter Ego. You see these eyes, you see this tongue, you see these ears, They may detect a quiver in the grass, an octave higher, a lower, a little different, an iota, but they're no different than your eyes and ears. I can't say, I don't know how Lady Liberty's tilted in my favor or yours, that I don't hear what I hear and don't see what I see in the cocksure night from Jefferson and Washington and terrorists in hoods to terrorists in hoods and sheets and a black man's head as he feels what's happening. You can also see and hear what's happening to him. You see these hands, they know enough to save us. I'm trying to say this true. I'm a cover artist's son, born to read between lines. But I also know that you know a whispered shatter in the trees is the collective mind of insects, birds, and animals witnessing what we do to each other. Forgive the brightly covered, forgive the brightly colored viper on the footpath guarding a forgotten shrine. Forgive the tiger dumbstruck beneath its own rainbow. Forgive the spotted bit eating her litter beneath the house. Forgive the boar hiding in October's red leaves. Forgive the stormy century of crows calling to death. Forgive the one who conjures a god out of spit and clay so she may seek redemption. Forgive the elephant's memory. Forgive the salt vine and the thorn bird's litany. Forgive the schizoid gatekeeper, his logbook's perfect excuse. Forgive the crocodile's swiftness. Forgive the pheromones and the idea of life on Mars. Forgive the heat lightning and the powder keg. Forgive the raccoon's sleight of hand beside the river. Forgive the moon calf and doubt's call baby. Forgive my father's larcenous tongue. Forgive my mother's intoxicated lullaby. Forgive my sixth sense. Forgive my heart and penis. But don't forgive my hands. I love the fact that the many voices of modern and contemporary poets have pursued the quest for freedom. This is especially true for Herbert's poetry. And yes, not only does he stay in the psychological realm of true poetry that crosses historical and intimate borders, questioning who we are in times of tribulation, intoxicating beauty, driven moments that are rather point blank in the everyday woven into truth. He feeds us the poetic here and there, and then he delivers the payload that helps to keep us in this world. And that I can not help but embrace. Want to read a few poems? camouflaging the Shamara. We tied branches to our helmets. We painted our faces and rifles with mud from a riverbank. Blades of grass hung from the pockets of our tiger suits. We wove ourselves into the terrain, content to be a hummingbird's target. We hugged bamboo and leaned against the breeze off the river, slow dragging with ghosts from Saigon to Bangkok, with women left in doorways, reaching in from America. We aimed at dark-hearted songbirds. In our way station of shadows, rock apes tried to burrow our cover, throwing stones at the sunset. Chameleons crawled our spines, changing from day to night, green to gold, gold to black. But we waited till the moon touched metal, till something almost broke inside us. VC struggled with the hillside like black silk, wrestling iron through grass. We weren't there. The river ran through our bones. Small animals took refuge against our bodies. We held our breath, ready to spring the L-shaped ambush as the world revolved under each man's eyelid. I think I'll just read three poems. I'll read two more. Anodyne. I love how it swells into a temple where it is held prisoner, for the god of blame resides. I love slopes and peaks, the secret paths that make me selfish. I love my crooked feet, shaped by vanity and work shoes made to outlast belief. The hardness, coupling milk it can't fashion. I love the lips, salt and honeycomb on the tongue, the hair holding off rain and snow, the white moons on my fingernails. I love how everything begs blood into song and prayer inside an egg. A ghost hums through my bones like Pan's midnight flute, shaping internal laws beside a troubled river. I love this body, made to weather the storm in the brain, raised out of the deep smell of fish and water hyacinth, out of rapture in the first regret. I love my big hands. I love it clear down to the soft, quick motor of each breath. The liver's 10 kinds of desire, the kidneys lust for sugar, the skin, the sac of dong and joy, the spleen floating like a compass needle inside nighttime, divining West Africa's dusty horizon. I love the birthmark, posed like a fighting cock on my right shoulder blade. I love this body, this solo and ragtime jubilee behind the left nipple, because I know I was born to wear out at least 100 angels. And the last poem I shall read. Okay. Or since there's such an atmosphere of climate change, I think I'm going to read Requiem. This is part, this is the first part of Requiem. So, when the strong and holy high winds whiplash over the soul of marshlands, eaten back to a sigh of salt water, the crescent city was already shook down to her pilings, her floating ribs, her spleen and backbone left trembling, and her old world facades and postmodern lethargy, lost to waterlogged memories and quick counting deeds, exposed for all eyes, damnable gaze, plumb lined and heart throb ballast and water taper. Already the last ghost song gone, no more than a drunken curse among oak and sweet gum leaves, a tally of broken treaties and absences, echoing cries of birds over the barrier islands, inherited by the remittance man Scalloway and King Cotton, and already the sky was falling in on itself, calling like a cloud of seagulls gone ravenous as the Gulf, reclaiming its ebb and flow chart, while the wind banged on shutters and unhinged doors from their frames, and unshingled the low ridge rolls, while the arch believers hum precious Lord in deep river, as the horsehair plastered walls gallop along with the surge. Already folklore begin to rise from the buried lollygag and sluice, pulsing beneath the Big Easy, rolling between and through itself, caught in some downward tug and turn, like a whirl of love affairs backed up in a stalled inlet, a knelt down army of Cyprus, a testament to how men dreamt land out of water, where bedrock was only the heart's bumping grind. Its deep, dark churn acceleration blows it down to those unmoored timbers. Already nothing but water, mumbling as the great turbulent eye lingered on a question, then turned. The gauze genitalia of Bacchus and Zulu left dangling, and magnolias and rain trees already. Thank you.
Józef Komuniaka,
Józef
Międzynarodowej Nagrody Literackiej
Komuniaka,
imienia Zbigniewa
the
Herberta
laureate of the
2021.
2021 Zbigniew
Święto
Herbert
poezji, no to
International
świętujmy dalej.
Literary
Za
Award.
chwilę
This is a
usłyszymy
celebration of poetry, so
koncert.
let's
To będzie
continue
premierowe
celebrating.
wykonanie trzech
We
pieśni
will now
skomponowanych
hear
przez Włodka
the
Pawlika.
premiere performance
Zapraszam.
of three
Do wierszy
songs
Zbigniewa Herberta.
composed
Wykonaj Robert
by
Gierlach,
Włodek
obaj panowie wybitni
Pawlik,
muzycy
two
światowej sławy.
poems by
Zapraszam
Zbigniew
panów.
Herbert.
Te pieśni to
They will be
piosenka o
performed
zamieraniu,
by Robert Gierlach.
głos wewnętrzny i
A song
piosenka
of
zakochanego.
dying inner
Bardzo proszę.
voice and a lover's song.
Za słaby, aby mówić. Rozchylam tylko wargi. Odbijam je na szybie powietrza. Wokoło spokój. A my idąc, pochylamy głowy, idąc przez wielki wiatr, tłowieją główne aleje, już ludzie nas nie widzą. To z tęsknoty to z wyrzeczenia. Coraz bliższy i bliższy chwili, co zmieni nas. W dnie mój głos wewnętrzny niczego nie doradza, niczego nie odradza. Nie mówi ani tak, nie mówi ani nie. Jest słabo słyszalny i prawie nieartykułowalny. Nawet jeśli się bardzo głęboko pochyli, słychać tylko oderwane od sensu sylaby. Staram się go nie zagłuszać. Obchodzę się z nim dobrze. Udaję, że traktuję go na równi, że mi na nim zależy. Czasami nawet staram się rozmawiać. Wiesz, wczoraj odmówiłem. Nie robiłem tego nigdy. Teraz też nie będę. Glu, glu! No więc sądzisz, że dobrze zrobiłem. Gagogi. Dobrze, że się zgadzamy. teraz odpocznij. Jutro znów pogadamy. Nie jest mi na nic potrzebny. Mógłbym o nim zapomnieć. Nie mam nadziei. Trochę żalu, że leży tak. Przykryty litością oddycha ciężko. Otwiera usta i stara się podnieść. Bezwładną głowę. Zapatrzony w Twoje oczy, zaplątany w Twoje rzęsy, które są sztachetą gęstą zielonego mego świata. Owinięty jak pierścionek wokół serdecznego palca, puszki palców jak 5 części różowego mego świata. Chodzę cały dzień strapiony, potrącany, wyśmiewany. A wieczorem Twoim oczom zwierzam cały mój niepokój. Zapatrzony aż po rzęsy, zakochany jeszcze głębiej. Gwiazdy się nad nami trzęsą, przytul główkę, będzie lepiej. Owinięty jak pierścionek wokół serdecznego palca, puszki palców jak 5 części różowego mego świata. Chodzę cały dzień strapiony, potrącany, wyśmiewany. A wieczorem Twoim oczom zwierzam cały mój niepokój. Zapatrzony aż po rzęsy. Zakochany jeszcze głębiej, gwiazdy się nad nami trzęsą. Przytul główkę, będzie lepiej. Gwiazdy się nad nami trzęsą. Przytul główkę, będzie
Włodek Pawlik i
That was
Robert Gierlach.
Włodek
Jeszcze raz
Pawlik
brawa,
and
tym
Robert
większe, że to
Gierlach.
była premiera
Let's hear
tryptyku
it for
pieśni
them,
do
because that was
wierszy Zbigniewa
the premier
Herberta.
performance of
Kompozytorem
the
tych
leader
pieśni jest Włodek
written
Pawlik.
to
Przypomnę, piosenka o
poems by
zamieraniu, głos
Zbigniew
wewnętrzny i piosenka
Herbert and
zakochanego.
composed by Włodek
Jeszcze nie,
Pawlik.
o właśnie, jest jeszcze laureat
We
nagrody. Być
still
może
have Józef
zechciałby powiedzieć jeszcze
Komuniaka with us.
kilka słów.
Perhaps he'd like to say a few
Robisu.
more
Zapraszamy,
words,
prosimy,
something by
czekamy.
way of an encore. Sir, please, anything?
I would like to say thanks so much.
Chciałbym powiedzieć bardzo, bardzo dziękuję.
It was a great experience. Thank you.
Za to przeżycie wielkie.
Aha, to już.
Oh.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Okay,
Bardzo
thank you
dziękuję
very
państwu.
much, and thank you very
Bardzo
much
dziękuję.
to
Może pamiętajmy jeszcze o Arturze
everyone.
Zapałowskim,
We
który
have
tłumaczy
an
nasze dzisiejsze spotkanie,
interpreter
znakomity tłumacz.
translating
Bardzo
tonight.
dziękuję Teatrowi Polskiemu
And
za
whom we'd also
gościnę
like to thank. I want to thank
i
our
ekipie
hosts
tego
at
teatru
Teatr
za
Polski
wspaniale
and
zorganizowali to spotkanie.
the entire
Pod
team,
przywództwem Szymona Kuśmida,
headed by
który
Szymon
realizował,
Kuśmider,
reżyserował dzisiejszy
the
wieczór.
director of tonight's event. Let's give it up for.
Aha, i jeszcze mam taką wiadomość miłą, że
And one piece of good news, in the lobby you will be able to purchase a selection of poems by Józef Komuniaka, The Blue Hour, translated by Katarzyna Jakubiak. The book was published by Znak Publishing House.
do zobaczenia.
Thank you very much again, and see you next time.